Okay, let's welcome back the filmmakers first of all, Taryn Southern and Elena Gaby. All right, so we have two other guests who are going to join the conversation this evening. Let me introduce them. Dr. Florian Solzbacher is with us. Boy, there's an applause for him already. Go for it. He's the executive chairman of Blackrock Microsystems, chairman of Neuromed, also director of the Center for Engineering Innovation at the University of Utah. Doctor, welcome to you. Thanks for being with us. I also want to introduce Buz Chmielewski. He is a sales consultant at Colors Wheelchair. He has a C6 spinal cord injury, paralyzed from the shoulders down. He works with researchers at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Labs, the first person to control 2 prosthetic arms with his thoughts. And Buz is with us. Buz, welcome to you. So I should mention, we have these microphones here, so I want to welcome you at any point to join us with your comments or your questions. I've had an opportunity to talk to the filmmakers. I'll get the ball rolling. I still have more questions. There are a lot of things that come from this, but please feel free at any point to join us at those microphones. You can just stand in line there and we'll take your questions. Okay, Taryn and Elena, let me just start with you. And this is something that we talked a little bit about on the radio before, and that is what it is that got you started with the idea for this film. And Taryn, some of it was both of you were thinking about like the dystopian images you had been seeing compared to the promise. It seems like what was the thing that you were thinking about? What were the conflicts that got you started thinking about all of this?
Definitely what you remember from our conversation. About 4 or 5 years ago, Black Mirror and Westworld came out, and they became these huge hit shows, and it was clear that the public was fascinated by these ideas of what it would mean to become something else, what it would mean to slowly merge with our technology. And I had been working peripherally in the intersection of science, tech, and storytelling for some time, focused a lot on AI and blockchain and some biotech. So not as much on the brain, but I was familiar with what was going on. And there was this obvious hole once I started poking around a bit more into the stories of the patients that were being serviced by this technology and thinking like, there are no stories out there that actually do them service. And what is happening in real life is more interesting than what's happening in Black Mirror and Westworld.
Right.
And so it just became clear abundantly clear that this movie needed to be made. Although certainly at the beginning we didn't know how we were going to do it and what stories we were going to tell, and there was a lot of evolution in the middle.
Yeah, and I had absolutely no prior knowledge about any of this when I came to this project. My background was in documentary storytelling, and I had done all these different subjects, but never science, never the brain, never tech. And when I started to hear what was happening with deep brain stimulation and with BrainGate and some of the things that were like just starting to get out there story-wise, I was like, whoa, this is a movie. This is a movie, and it's complex, and it's rich, and it's got everything that I want from a film, and I didn't know anything about it, so it was so exciting.
I did forget to mention there was a book that was actually a huge source of inspiration for us, and that was Homo Deus by Yuval Harari. So I don't know how many of you have read that book, but it's become very popular, and the ideas in that book were just mind-blowing, and it was like, this is happening now. We have the ability to tell this story. We have to do it.
So we're going to share these microphones, but Dr. Solzbacher, and I want to hear Buz on this too. What do you think when you look around and see in popular culture the impressions of the future, like dystopian views? Like, what do you think as people who are influenced by it, whose lives are influenced by it?
For me, I see the technology advancing things in the future. I mean, for the project that I'm working on, we're doing prosthetic arms. I don't need them, obviously. So I'm looking at folks that don't have the capabilities or may not have the capabilities to be able to change their life, to be able to give that independence back, to give that freedom back. You saw in some of the film, too, that that's a major step in somebody's life, to have that taken away, to be able to give something back. I talk to a lot of new patients once they have a spinal cord injury, and that's one of the first things I hear is, my independence is gone.
Yeah.
Or I can't do this, or I can't do that. And if I can be part of some of that research that helps someone in the future, I'm all in for it.
Yeah, I think I consider myself very fortunate or lucky to be part of this effort. You know, usually as an engineer, you're in the background of these kinds of activities. The real motivation behind it was really to help people. In my case, it's probably going back about 30 years, starting from a teenager, where I've seen that there was a need to help that then drives you to learn certain skills. You know, engineers tend to be sort of socially awkward. This is not the kind of thing that we normally do. We're more comfortable with the machines behind a screen or so, rather in front of a big audience where I can hardly see anybody. But what's really motivating you is to really try and help. Now, at the same time, of course, you know, what you see in Hollywood movies and series triggers you to be very much aware of the fact that you need to ask the right ethical questions up front, you know.
Yeah.
You can't, like the generations of engineers before us, just march forward and be focused on, you know, solving a specific technical problem. There's also the reality, I mean, I'm very fortunate to be here. There are a lot of the people of the team in here, you know, Dr. Norman also, who actually invented the Utah array, and others that deserve to be part of it. It's 50 years ago that we landed on the moon. People remember Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. Do they remember Tommy Steele, Dr. Stanley, and a lot of other people? You know, the engineer who was responsible last 1 minute 49 seconds before the landing, the computer systems went down, and they went praying to just hope that nothing would happen. And you know, having people like Buzz, Ian Burkhardt, Nathan Copeland, who had the handshake with President Obama, be the ones who have the courage to try this out and help us work on that, I think is really tremendous. And what is wonderful about a movie like this is that it finally opens this up. You know, 10 years ago, a lot of what we were doing would have been considered fairly crazy, dangerous, and you really did that in a niche for only those people that desperately needed that. Nobody else was willing to help them, and we realized we can. And I think if you can, you have a responsibility to do so. But now we're getting to a point where things are accelerating, the kind of questions that Brian is asking become important, and that we have a film like this that I think in a very balanced way approaches it and makes it accessible is really wonderful. And I hope it gets more support, you know, so just like the genetics initiatives help with the genome and helping with a lot of you know, diseases and challenges on that front. We're hoping to sort of have a revolution in this place, and we're all part of that. And again, I'm just fortunate to be on stage, but there are many people in the audience here, and you see there are many labs and people that work on it.
Yeah, I'm interested in the question of, is it hard to apply restraint when you are such on the verge of changing, you're already changing people's actual physical existence, their lives. So it must be difficult to apply the brakes at all when there are these bigger moral, bigger ethical questions at play. So maybe talk a little bit about that, and for the filmmakers too, because you obviously raised those questions, you encountered those questions, but Doctor, you start, like, because I think a lot of us are like, just go for it, and we'll worry about the big questions later.
And honestly, that is very hard, and particularly when you see sometimes even the transition in some of the people that
Doctor,
get
that a little
Sorry,
closer.
yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Not practiced this. But obviously, and actually the strongest motivator is if you do want to help the patients that are affected by it, you can get very upset about regulatory hurdles and other challenges, raising capital, people telling you, it's not a market, we don't care. And it's like, as a society, don't we have a responsibility to help those people? And we can, and we don't just because it's financial, we're worried about it. At the same time, you know, and you know, it's a constant struggle with every technology, but with those that go sort of a step further, you don't want to damage it or take that opportunity away from those people you can help, because you've maybe made one step too fast. And it is very difficult. I mean, generations of researchers before me worked on that, and they did not have the courage to go into human subjects, even though some of the data was there, sometimes on the benchtop in animal models, because the concern is if it goes sideways, we spend decades working on that, and we take it away. So I don't have a clear and easy answer, but it is a constant balancing act, and sometimes you have to push forward. You know, as scientists, as entrepreneurs, people always think we take reckless risks. You don't. You try to take calculated risks. Actually, you're very conservative very often in order to make sure you're not breaking anything, because you have a responsibility to people like Buz and me, but also everybody else who's invested their life, their effort, capital in making that work by not going crazy, by not doing these things, you know. And the reality, however, is that we need to ask ourselves the question, what happens if it does become a consumer product? If people think about enhancement, these type of things. Scientists shy away of that. We want to say this is possible, we don't want to do it, but the reality is we enable it, just like the people did the physics that led to the nuclear weapons. Eventually, that was not the intent, but it was a consequence. And so I think we're fortunately much further ahead than generations of people before us 50, 100 years ago, that were trying to implement it. Not always very well, and I don't know, we can just hope that we, by asking the right questions and being careful, that we do the things right, and generations after us will be able to judge whether we took the right decisions or we screwed it up. I hope we did the first.
Buz, what do you think?
Sorry.
I have to ask a question again. I went blank for a minute, so.
I'm just wondering about, part of the film is about like the ethical questions, some of the bigger moral questions that are at play here. I mean, if this technology, which is so extraordinary, if we lose track of it, if it goes so far that we're not thinking about the implications, some of the other consequences, how are you thinking about all of that? Or are you thinking about those questions necessarily yet?
In my lab back in Baltimore, I'm kind of that guy that's, well, let's go up another notch. Or like, no, we can't.
Right.
You know, the guidelines say we can only go here. I'm like, well, I won't tell. So, because I'm a very competitive person, and you know, it's one of those things that, well, we're at our threshold. Well, what if we go above the threshold? We're almost there to be able to make this happen. I mean, I'm not that. I'm the good crazy. I'm not the, you know, the psycho crazy. That, you know, I want to advance this, and I want to do it safely, and I want to make it better for everybody. But I'm that guy that's kind of willing to push the line a little bit. And for me, I mean, for somebody else that isn't comfortable with that, then no, let them stay along their, you know, the guidelines and everything. But is there possibilities that something bad could come out of this? I mean, anything good can be turned evil to a certain point, but I don't worry about that type of stuff. Like you said, I want to be that pioneer that says, all right, well, we can only go to 10. Well, Buz is here, so let's go to 11.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. Taryn and Elena, talk a little bit about that aspect of the film and what you learned in the process.
I'll say this, we cut together over 30 minutes worth of material in the area of ethics, and what you saw up on that screen was just a tiny sliver. And so cutting that down was very, very challenging, because in many ways we felt like we weren't actually asking all of the questions that should be asked. But we also realized that within the constraints of a film, you just only have so much space. And also, you know, at the end of the day, this is a movie about these three people. And some of these ethical questions, they just feel like they get so far removed from where we're at in real life with this technology and with these stories of these individuals that we followed, that we made the decision to cut a lot of it out. But it's really easy to think of all the scary things that can happen. That's what our brains do. That's naturally what they do. Our amygdala just like sees a brain chip and it goes crazy. It's a little harder to actually develop empathy and understand the remarkable possibilities. So that's what we tried our best to focus on while still also asking some of the tough questions.
And I think just to add to that, when you're structuring a documentary, I think as the filmmaker, that's really your voice coming out in a kind of roundabout way. So the conscious decision that we made to come back to the positive things that happened to these three people at the end, after you've heard the ethical arguments, I think was Taryn and my way of saying, we know that all of this could happen and all of this needs to be discussed. But at the end of the day, what we want to remind everyone is that this was the outcome for these people, and that's what matters right now. So when we structured it that way, it was our little filmmaker voice, you know,
Our voice of techno-optimism.
right,
Yeah.
just trying to make our movie be about that.
I'm glad you did. Yeah, good. I'm glad you. That's because that's why the film is good. It's like not. It's just because it's about this abstract technology. Really, it's about these three people. It's about their lives, and all of them expressed. In some ways, Buz's point of view is in there with Bill, and then Anne. Just the conflicts that she's going through, whether she wants to do this. And I'm glad we're having this conversation after the film. Having it before, we didn't want to give anything away.
Right.
So it's better that you guys know what happens, but yeah. Anyway. Yes, question.
So yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, great job on the film. It was just unbelievable, and it was just so well done. It was
Thank you so much.
really came full circle, and I'm really glad you had good outcomes. You said first that you have prosthetics that are controlled. Like, which ones are they?
In our lab, we have two prosthetic or robotic arms. They're basically hooked to kind of a frame that, like you saw in the film, that they're hooked up to my ports.
Oh, okay. I thought you had them in like your legs or something. Where
Oh, no. They're worth a whole lot more than they'll want to hook up to me. Or just like any new technology, we do have safety switches that, I don't want to make a bad joke here, but if they would go kind of crazy, they got to be able to stop them, or if they don't work the way they should. So, but yeah, they're hooked to a frame in the lab.
Okay. So you say, like, okay, let's take it to 11. Do you think there should be controls or laws or anything to regulate so that, like, suddenly Iron Man is not, like, appearing?
Absolutely. I mean, Iron Man hopefully is, a few years down the road, but yeah, I joke about, going to 11. I mean, I would, to a certain extent. I mean, because I have stimulus plus motor stuff with mine. So with the engineers, with the doctors, with all the people involved in this, they know in some cases that even the smallest jump could be detrimental to a certain point. So what may not hurt me may hurt the person next to me. So we have to take baby steps here in the beginning. Just like any technology, as things progress, they become more advanced, more knowledge is put into it, then we'll go to 11, we'll go to 12, and I'll still be saying, well, let's go to 14, let's go to 15. But it's got to be baby steps, because I love all my doctors, my engineers, but they love to fix what isn't broken sometimes. So it's one of those things that it works great, but they want to make it better before it needs to be better. So we can't give them too much freedom at this point.
So the deep brain...
I can see Buz fighting crime in a big shiny suit. You'd love that.
100%.
It better be
Right?
super shiny, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
The deep brain stimulation, how many other success stories are out there right now?
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands for Parkinson's. And what's really exciting right now is that we're starting to see deep brain stimulation being used for other things. So in Canada, very, very recently, they used deep brain stimulation for someone who was addicted to alcohol, to the extent that they had had a liver transplant and still went back to drinking, unfortunately, because this is how addiction works in that person. And the deep brain stimulation was able to change this person's life, and they no longer felt the desire to drink.
It's in a lot of trials. Florian, you can probably speak to this, but everything from anorexia nervosa disorder to obsessive compulsive disorder, obesity. There's a guy who was just implanted somewhere in the South for morphine, opioid addiction.
Depression as well. But beyond the deep brain stimulation, also devices like what Buz is working on right now. About a year ago, we had a panel actually similar to this one, where I suggested let's not have the engineers, researchers, doctors on stage. Let's only put the patients on stage. And that case, we had people on there, many of which had worked with this technology, tetraplegics that are very limited. And what really surprised me, because this was designed initially as a tool to help advance it and develop products in the future, but they came out of it saying, this works, can I take it home? We've spent many years with that, and why the hell do I have to be part of a multi-million-dollar study to get access to that? Now, Buz is, really amazing in that he has quite a bit of independence and freedom and still went for that. But there's some candidates that came technically, clinically depressed into the study with almost no movement from the neck down, just like Bill that you saw. And they've been able, with one of them, where we're now working on maybe having him race a car in the salt flats, and
Wow.
do all sorts of activities that they couldn't do before. And the amazing thing is, if you see the fire in their eyes and the excitement and the energy and the hope that you're giving, that is such a motivator for everybody to also, you see the shining, the positive part here, but there is so much work that goes into making this work on so many levels that it's easy to try and give up at times. And it's always this question of what do you do with the time that you're given, and having the ability to do something that meaningful that drives it. And so there's work in auditory implants, in hearing. We just recently had one of the first locked-in patients. Sometimes people end up, their brain is fully intact, they cannot communicate anymore. So there's a lot of areas. We're sort of at an inclination point now where you'll see more of those things. And just like pacemakers that 50 years ago where, in most cases you had a heart attack, most likely you would not survive. In some cases, if you're lucky, you would be resuscitated. And then there were the first generation pacemakers, the first candidate, I think here in Utah lived for a week or so.
But we've gone past the tipping point, you're saying.
But yeah, there it's really gone up.
Yeah.
And I think we can see this next revolution in neurological disorders, and a lot of it will be technologies like what you've seen in those movies and others that haven't been presented here. So I'm very hopeful, and we just need to make sure that we have the courage to take the next step. And sometimes we have moments like in the Apollo mission where the last 2 minutes the computer systems were down. You just say, pray to God, let this thing land it, stop flying, land it. And then over time, we advance. And it's just that why I said, I'm just eternally grateful that somebody sort of watched over, that allowed us all to do that, and that there are more and more people that are now coming in and saying, we should do this, have people watch over it. But I think it'll become just as normal as your smartphone now, as the heart pacemakers that we have right now. Nobody thinks about putting something in there anymore. It's even sometimes a prophylactic. So, sorry.
Just remember, resistance is futile.
That's true. Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the film. It was amazing, and thank you for hosting the Q&A.
Thank you.
I really like the techno-optimism, as you said, that you guys have, and I agree that this kind of trend is coming. It's going to happen. And with pacemakers, like you mentioned, they've been around for a while now, and we don't really think about them the same way we do as like a brain implant. But a few years ago in Ohio, there was a court case where they wanted to use data from somebody's pacemaker in a trial, and there was a big dilemma because that had never been done. They didn't really know what the ethical thing to do was or what concerns there were. So as we approach kind of this new age, I guess, of innovation, how do each of you envision introducing it into the, I guess, public forum or society as a whole?
I think that's a really interesting example, and I hadn't heard about that story, so thank you for sharing. I think the short answer is we don't totally know. And there certainly, in my opinion, aren't enough people talking about this to come to a consensus about what we should do. So with the film, I think Taryn and I are just hoping that people like you and our viewers will start to come up with these really important discussion points. And the more people we have thinking about this, the more people can bring up things like that and start to have really good ideas about how to solve it. Nita Farahani, who's the Duke professor in the film, has an interesting point where she says that our Constitution protects freedom of speech, but it doesn't actually say anything about freedom of thought. And as we move into a space where you might not actually have to speak words in order for somebody to get access to what you're thinking, and thinking could mean something as simple as like, I want to move my arm, but it could also mean something as complicated as like, I want a divorce, you know? So how do we come up with new legal frameworks to deal with this, and what cases are gonna be the example that set the precedent that all legal cases after that follow? I'm not totally sure. I think maybe you guys have some more ideas on that.
One way I think we can do it is with, great films like this, to be able to get it out there, to have, sometimes we see too many movies, or people see too many movies and see the evil sides of, brain implants and this, that, and the other, where that's all sci-fi. To where you have someone like me that goes out and has fun with it, makes jokes about it, and, I go out and, I show my ports off proudly. It's one of those things that, one of my best things is I'll talk about it to anybody. But if I don't have time, I'll wear a hat or something. But if I go through a drive-through and I forget to put my hat back on, as soon as I hit that first person, they're like, yeah, it's 5:14. And then you can see them kind of on the mic telling the next guy or girl, oh my God, check out this guy up here. And then the next window, they're looking out, and you got 5 other people behind them, trying not to make it obvious that they're looking. And I just have to laugh. I mean, because I know they don't have time to ask questions or too afraid to. But it's stuff like that we have to make it kind of, everyday type stuff, where it can't be kind of taboo or just something that it's just in the lab all the time. So that's one of my things is, I get out there with everybody, especially with the other work I do, with the freshly injured patients that I talk to. It's all about having fun with it, but advancing the technology to make a difference in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree, Buzz. I think socializing the positive aspects of this are critical. Obviously, there's a million things that can and will go wrong. I think a lot of those things are already problems that exist now, and they're just going to be highlighted because this is brain technology. But we have major privacy issues right now, and a major problem with people being aware of how these privacy issues actually manifest in their own lives and what they should do about it. And so, yeah, I think to your question, it's just about having as many discussions as possible, and also realizing that as the technology advances, it's going to advance faster than policy. And so while it might create some new problems, it'll also create some probably unlikely solutions too.
Yeah, I think sort of, oh, sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Wait, hold on, let's just finish the point,
sorry,
and then we'll move on.
Very briefly. I think sort of as a final comment on that, transparency is important. Everybody like Buzz, like your efforts, your ambassadors for that. The plea I would like to make in that is to make sure that as we critically analyze that and put it out in the open, to do so carefully and to maybe not try to break it, because if you go in and you do compare it with Westworld and other things, inadvertently you may at one point cause harm to people that we would like to help, because that was the biggest concern all along. Even doing something like this, is there backlash, because people don't, it's complicated, it's scary, and do we want to, or do we rather want to stay under the radar screen, help people, and let that grow. So, sorry.
This is a organizational psychologist, suggestion, inquiry combined. Is there, among the thousands of studies on Parkinson's where you're working, a interdisciplinary team anywhere in that mix? Because interdisciplinary has something to contribute. It's the formation of chimneys of organizations where departmentals fight each other. We've got mindfulness, nutrition, much less religion and the ethical issues. And Christopher Reeve got his finger to move. It took a year after 5 years of something else, and he couldn't, I mean, he was severed from the neck down, okay? So it was exactly the messing with the hardwiring that he was able to do with the technology. Now, if we had an interdisciplinary team, we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 people specializing in John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness kind of approach to an influence, to an impact. And we don't have competition between the disciplines. They come together and we integrate someone with the ethical questions to help form that. So I'm interested in knowing, I'll hang around, try and catch you. Is there an interdisciplinary thing going? Because let's not do the atomic bomb thing. We found out how to do it, and we started blowing things up. And all we cared about was how big can we make it? How many people can we kill? How big a bomb can we make? Can't we? So now that we know we can do with the hardwiring, which thrills me, either as a God follower or as an evolutionary student. Okay, either way, it's great. Okay, I'll talk to you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Are you seeing different people from different fields all having these conversations about the implications?
In the same room at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Team.
In the same conference room in a hotel, are you seeing that?
No, this is more of your guys' side of that.
Yeah.
So,
What do you think? Or are we in early days?
No, depends maybe a little bit on the project and the scope, but I mean, ethical considerations are an integral part of every clinical study that is being done, and in particular when it's such a high risk and you know has impact on so many levels. There's quite a bit of effort that goes into that. Also, as projects have matured, when you get funding, usually either from foundations, from certain government agencies, etc., to move forward in that area, the effort that goes into interdisciplinarity, where it's not just the engineer and the clinician, and then maybe 5 disciplines of engineers and 3 disciplines of clinicians or whatever, but it does include the psychology, the ethics, the social impact, you know, a number of different aspects. That is growing, and I think a lot of those mistakes that were made, you know, 50, 60 years ago, I think there are controls for in the system. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. At the same time, it's always a balancing act, because the more you add, the more expensive and complex it becomes.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it makes it very hard for somebody like Buz to say, want to go from 10 to 11, which is important. You know, a friend of mine started one of the first cochlear implant companies for profoundly deaf kids. And she still tells me, when we started 30 years ago, we built stuff in my lab. A friend of mine was a doctor. He put it into patients. Nothing regulatory. Nobody asked questions. It worked well, so he asked for more. Today, they're $1 billion revenue company. They help a lot of people. And today, she said, I have 270 people on staff only that do regulatory and ethics stuff. If that is my threshold now, Buz would not be here. We wouldn't be here. So I think it is always the challenge. But there's a lot going on, and I think we're no longer in a domain where an engineer just goes, hey, I can do that. And,
When maybe sometimes they should just say, I can do that.
Sometimes they should.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
people like Buz that say, go.
Yeah, right.
Like, hey.
Thank you. Yes.
I think my question is like healthcare, and I maybe you haven't even gone that far yet in thinking about that, but like who is going to be able to afford this? It seems very expensive. It seems like we already have healthcare issues that people who desperately need even less than this cannot get it. I don't mean to sound like Debbie Downer, but it just is heavy on my mind. And then the other thing is, like, my other concern is, at what point, and not with something like Buz, what you've been through, like spinal cord or paralysis or Parkinson's, but like things like anxiety and depression, at what point do we stop asking people to try and heal themselves? You know, are we just going to start putting electrodes and making it easy for people? I mean, that's part of the human experience, is overcoming our challenges. And so, I don't know, I'd love to hear any feedback you might have about
Two
that.
huge
They're
questions.
very big,
Good ones, too.
big
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out if my brain right now can attempt to deliver part of an answer for one. What was the first one again?
Well, the first one was,
healthcare.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the inequity of it all. I mean, these are amazing technologies, but who really has access to them, at least right now?
Yeah, and those were actually two questions that I think we toyed with in our original ethics section that ended up getting cut down. Two of the patients that you saw here are Canadian, so Canadian healthcare. Yeah, I think so. It was also a great drone shot too. So
Yeah. That's why we picked
They live
them.
in a tiny, rural area, way outside of Toronto. But yeah, the Canadian healthcare system certainly has advantages in terms of this kind of technology. Of course, and Florian could speak more to this, but as time has gone on and this has evolved, just like any other technology, it's getting cheaper, it's getting smaller, it's getting easier. And you need to reach scale, you need to reach a lot of people in order to continue on that trend. So I think it's hard for anyone to stop progress when, despite these big issues that need to be solved for outside of that, and I agree with you. On the second point, remind me what the second one
Well,
was.
the second point is a good one. I had actually
It was
thought about
really
it.
good.
It's like, oh, so this is oversimplifying it, but we get to a point where we can adjust some knobs to
Healing.
deal with our depression, our anxiety.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe we may get there, but it does raise that question of what about the battle? But who is it? Is it Anne who says, I'm not sure I need to go through that battle? Is that really that necessary if we can fix this?
It's such a good question, and I've struggled myself with figuring out how I feel about it because, even with Anne, for instance, I don't know that we specifically had her say this in the film, but quite frequently in her interviews, for her, the anxiety of the Parkinson's was worse than any of the other symptoms. Yeah. It was. Sure, but I guess my point is, unless you're that person, we don't know what your internal experience is. We can only imagine, but we don't really know, and some things we consider pathological, and other things we consider the result of extenuating circumstances, other things biochemical. Right now, we dole out pills to everyone, and we call that a good solution, but that's ostensibly carpet bombing the brain. So I think it all just depends on how you look at it, but ultimately we only know our own experience.
And I think we have this problem already with pharmaceuticals because we have so many situations where things are being overprescribed or things are being prescribed for too long. And I think one thing that's really interesting to explore is, like, if you have an ailment like depression or anxiety or any other mental illness, and you're taking medication for it, how do we figure out how to make it so that you're not on that medication for the rest of your life, if we can? How do we make it so that it's something you can overcome and move forward? So whether that's a medicine or whether that's a brain interface, I'm not sure that it matters what the device is as much as it matters that we're saying, if you have something that's holding you back, how can you take that and learn something about yourself and keep going so that you don't have it forever and you're not reliant on these medications forever, you know, if possible.
Yeah, actually, to follow up on that one, you may want to consider titrating off it if you can. In some cases, these are chronic or terminal diseases, then you may not be able to. And I don't think either one of us should decide that it's something where, you know, the patient or the person suffering from that needs to be the key driver, maybe with some oversight. I really liked your question about the healthcare costs and the societal disparity as well. I mean, obviously, people of us who work on that, our drive is to say, let's make that affordable so that you can get, I mean, the real driver for that is this shouldn't be more expensive than a normal cardiac pacemaker. You know, right now, you need to be part of a multi-million-dollar study. Now, the reality is that over the last 10 years, we've worked on miniaturizing, and essentially from an actual cost point of view, you probably could offer that for something that's similar to one of those implantable hearing aids, which are paid for and covered by the insurance system, so there's no disparity there. There are regulatory hurdles. Up until, I would have said 2 or 3 years ago, you could have not gone to any investor to say, I'm going to need X dollars to get clinical approval for that, because those hurdles have become so high. Now we're getting to a point, and that is something that really motivated me, as I said, that meeting that we had a year and a half ago, where patients pleaded with us and said, I want to take it home. Can I please keep it? And we've actually got the first 2 patients coming off studies now that did not have to explant. Many people don't know that in many cases, because of the way it's structured, once the study is at the end, has to come out, because nobody can pay for the continued care, which seems really wrong to me. You know, it's working, the person is happy. We're making it even worse than it was before by taking it away. But that's the way our system is structured. So we're getting to that point where I think we can. And so my main driver right now is I want to make sure we get a humanitarian device exemption for these things. So we don't have to go through these $100, $200 million hurdles to get approval, but get approval to allow people like Buz and others that wanted to get it, and to say either, you know, you can't forget, for somebody who's really a tetraplegic, the costs go into the millions. It's maybe 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 in the first year alone. The continued care and everything, and the loss in productivity because they're not. Now, some of them have become integral parts of the science team. They're actually contributing members of society, can do things, their self-worth has grown. I think many of them would probably, even if it cost $100,000, say, this is my entire life, I'll make that work. But our driver is to have it be more like a pacemaker, that it's maybe eventually $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 or so. And we need to make sure it becomes reimbursable. And so these are the next steps. And then you learn, it'll go from dozens of people that have that to hundreds to thousands, and then the next generation comes out. Sorry.
Great. No.
But you'll probably have an opinion on the patients.
No, not really. I mean, it's a little different with, you know, like the epilepsy and stuff like that, or depression. With a spinal cord patient, I guess I do at this point, thanks. But I mean, until you go through something, someone on the outside can say one thing, well, do this, do that. But until you go through that, nobody really knows to a certain extent. I mean, I've had some great nurses, PTs, OTs, family members that said, well, you just need to try harder. You just need to do this. You need to, and it's one of those things that, well, you don't think I've tried that already? So, I mean, it's a great point that you brought up. But again, like they were saying up here too, I mean, medicine is to a certain extent is good, but like with medicine, it starts out at a smaller dose. We have to go further up in doses as we go along. Where with a spinal cord injury, you know, I started out with no movement, like what you see today, but every spinal cord is different. You could have 10 people that did exactly the same injury I had. One person, you know, walks away with a Band-Aid on their head. The other person could be dead, everything in between. So there's no 2 patients exactly the same, and that goes for Parkinson's, it goes for blindness, it goes for any type of disease. So what works for one person may not work for another, and that goes back to the, you know, what other people feel about it as well. So it's, until you've walked in that person's shoes, you really don't know.
Good. I think time for 2 more. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. This is a short question. Incredible film. Loved it. I wanted to ask about, there was a moment in the film when there were two people playing a game, 21 questions, there's an answer, and someone asking the questions. How accurate is the answer in that? And then I also wanted to ask another question. Have you tried that? Is it, and if you have tried it, is it, can you describe your experience?
I have tried it.
Okay.
It's really fun. So what's happening, and I'll go into a little bit more detail than what you saw, but there's a computer kind of helping a little bit, but when she's receiving, the one guy's looking at the lights, and he's looking back and forth whether it's yes or no. So the device is reading what kind of light he's looking at from his brain, and that's what's sending a signal to the other device on the woman that's kind of like that eight-shape thing on the back of her head.
Right.
That's a TDCS, so it's stimulating a phosphene, which is a squiggly line in her field of vision that nobody else can see except her. So if it's a yes, she gets a phosphene. If it's a no, she doesn't get a phosphene, and that's how she knows. And it's very accurate, because if that thing goes off and you see a phosphene, you know it's a yes. And the crazy thing about the phosphene is that it is like a complete change in your own perception that nobody else can see and nobody else knew it happened, and yet you saw this squiggly little lightning bolt in your field of vision that wasn't there before, and it's coming from the thing that just stimulated your brain. And that's how it's kind of like a wraparound way.
It's like a hallucination, kind of?
No, it's not a hallucination. It's, imagine I'm looking at this audience and somebody photoshopped like a little like hair thin squiggly line that's bright. Like, yeah, I guess it is kind of like a hallucination.
Right.
But I'm thinking, fair point, Taryn.
But it's real.
But it's real.
Yeah.
It's real.
Exactly. I'm like, it's not a hallucination because it's there.
It's real.
I'm just thinking of hallucinations I've had, and they're all real.
Yeah, but it's like, it's that thing where it's like, it's real because I saw it in my field of view, but it's not there. I guess that is exactly a hallucination. That's it.
But
Yeah.
it's so cool.
It is.
That is, yeah, I think that was amazing.
And some people don't see them. They did say that there's like a few people that they've tried it on that don't get it at all, and then those people don't get picked to do the experiment when we're filming.
They will not be the future mind readers.
So it's like mind reading?
No, it's because he has to look at one light or the other, and it's reading what he's looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, but maybe in the future.
It's more like communication.
Yeah, it's just a system to communicate without words using two different types of brain interfaces.
But it's headed there, right? It's headed towards mind reading. No?
I mean, there are other experiments that I think are better equipped to demonstrate the capabilities of mind reading. We can now put people in an fMRI machine and decode the decode imagery that they're thinking about inside their brains with very advanced algorithms, just looking at the blood flow patterns in their brain.
Just wait till Google gets a hold of that.
I think they're already on it.
Now you know they're on it. Did you have another question?
No, that's all.
Good.
That was
Thank
great.
you very much.
much.
Yes.
So my question is about neuroethics, and I want to thank Dr. Solzbacher for bringing it up and adding context to it. But when these clinical studies do come to an end, it's like telling these research participants, thank you very much for your experience and your knowledge, but we're going to take the technology away that's improved your life, and you're going to go back to living that less improved life. So my question is, on the neuroethics segment portion of the film that you guys had to cut out, did any of that address that aspect of the neuroethics?
Love that.
What is it ethical to give this technology, for the purpose of research to improves their life,
Then take it
Yeah.
away.
and then take it
And then
out?
send them home. Yeah.
Oh, it was not something that people went into, in our interviews. I think we had one researcher maybe talk a little bit about that, but no, I think that's heartbreaking, and particularly as it relates to the patients. So, really good point, but no, it didn't make it into our piece. But I think it takes researchers like you who are doing the clinical work and who have seen this happen, and to talk about that and make
As
that a point.
I'd like to encourage I Am Human too, that does explore the next level of these type of issues and, a
In the sequel.
neuroethics portion.
How far are we, Doctor, from cracking the code? Like it comes up, that there's a code of movement. Do we know the code? How close are we to, like you say we've sort of crossed a kind of a tipping point, but just how far away are we from cracking that code, if that makes any sense?
Well, depends on which code you're talking
I know,
about.
there's so many codes.
There's so many different codes. I think if you look at providing useful and meaningful restoration of some function, like the ones that we saw, motor, some sensory function, which by the way is very important as well, hearing, seeing there's multiple efforts going on in that domain, we're getting much closer to providing something that is very valuable to people already. But I would compare some of what we're doing, as I said, to the first generation pacemakers, where there was still sort of a 19-inch rack of equipment next to the hospital bed, or, the first car that was built or so, which is very different from, what we're looking at right now, next generation Tesla with autonomous driving. There are people who are looking at memory to try and restore memory in patients with Alzheimer's, obviously. And of course, whenever you do that, the question is very quickly, well, can you actually figure out what somebody is really thinking or perceiving, or what their memories, can you restore them? I think that one is, and I think that is where, we can, when you look at progress is always an exponential curve, and we tend to think in a linear fashion. And so short term, we're overestimating, we're scared, and we think all of this is going to happen. Long term, we underestimate, because eventually this hockey stick curve is going to go through that. I think we're probably at least 2 generations off to really see that. Now, some of the advances in artificial intelligence and computer power are hard to predict, but just think of the number of cells, 100 billion neurons with 10,000 connections between each of them. Right now, we're proud that we have I'm part of an effort where we're looking at now the first time 1 million neurons that we're measuring. What we do almost here is usually 100 electrodes, 400, maybe 1,000, and we really give value to people to really figure out what's going on here, and that's the code we're talking about. But if we were to give up, this is like, Leonardo giving up with his attempts to building flying machines and other things, because he would never get there. I may not see some of that, but I will keep working on that, and there's a lot of people in this audience as well who, help support it and work on that, and we will continue to work on that. So I think that's the answer. There's certain things that we're
You're
very
creating
close.
the basis for this amazing future,
And generations after us, we're doing the ones that do the first 200, the Wright brothers 200 feet flight.
Right.
Others will go to the moon, and that's okay.
Yeah. You've referred to the moon a couple times. You must have been a big fan of the NASA moon program. He loved that moment where Neil Armstrong takes over from the computer and lands right?
Yeah, no, where this comes from is I've been an engineer. I've loved fiddling with things. These were the heroes when I grew up, and I've sometimes suffered a little bit from the fact that I saw, it's getting better now, but there was sort of a generation where suddenly being the person that builds these widgets and does things is no longer, you're always a little weird. You're not the cool kid, but definitely not. You're the go-to kid if somebody needs their homework done or fixed. But eventually you realize it's really something that gives you meaning in life, and you want to do that. There's been sort of a feeling that oftentimes being on TV and, being famous or being in athletics, that one is what kids aspire to, whereas, what really drives the society forward is a lot of science and engineering, and connecting that with these other areas, not in a vacuum. And so that's why that sort of keeps coming up. And this year was the 50-year anniversary, so a lot of the childhood memories come up, and interacting with some of the people behind the scenes, and so I don't know, felt I needed to share that.
Good, glad you did, yes. Quickly, yes.
Quick, and you guys are young and talented and crazy, crazy smart. Where are you going next with your documentaries?
Thank you so much for that compliment. In 2019, kind of as we were wrapping up I Am Human, and in the near final stages of prepping for our premiere, Taryn was managing all of that incredible polish work, and she did such a phenomenal job, and I'm so lucky that she took the lead on all of that because it was a monumental task. And in the meantime, I was in New York, and I was starting another project, which will hopefully come out this year as well. Completely different subject matter and very, very different way that we made it. It's a very fly-on-the-wall movie. It's the production value does not look like I Am Human. It's very gritty. It's very on the ground. And I was kind of drawn to the project to just do something very, very different. And beyond that, I don't know yet.
Thank you so much. Right before this film, I was actually working on an artistic endeavor that involved making music with artificial intelligence.
Do people know Taryn is a big deal in the YouTube musician community? Like a big deal? Some of us older folks may not know that, but she's the thing.
Very nice of you to
say.
say.
So she's been retweeting some of our tweets, and we're like, man, we're getting a ton of response. Like, Taryn's very popular. Anyway, keep going. Sorry, yes.
That's very kind of you. I was a former YouTuber, but recovered.
Yeah, no more, right.
I can actually say that now. Isn't that insane? Former recovered YouTuber. Yeah. Weird. Okay. So, yeah, I probably am going to go back into doing some more storytelling in the AI space. But I also am I have a development deal right now with National Geographic, and so I'm developing some ideas for them, one of which I hope will be an I Am Human TV series.
Oh, terrific. Well, I'll just say to both of you, congratulations on this film. It's extraordinary. Dr. Buz, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you all for sticking around.
Thank you so much for coming.